I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Um, uh, so please meet Obie Fernandez. If you've been doing Rails for a while, you're probably familiar with his famous book, The Rails Way. He's a seasoned Ruby on Rails developer, author, musician, prominent figure in the software development community. With nearly 3 decades of experience in the industry, Obie has been at the forefront of adopting and promoting innovative software development practices. As the founder and chief scientist of Olympia AI, he continues to explore the integration of AI within software development, pushing the boundaries of traditional programming paradigms. His recent work focuses on leveraging AI to enhance the expressiveness and efficiency of Ruby on Rails, aiming to redefine how developers interact with code and conceive application functionalities. Obie, take it away.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Um, all right, so I think I should probably share my screen. I haven't done this in a while. Let's see, share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you can just hook me up with permission to share. You guys know how to use your hand thing in Zoom? How many of you are actually doing AI stuff in Ruby already? Looks like maybe a couple. All right. So let me try sharing again. Still disabled. So I'll just talk a little bit. So I started my I've done a few AI and machine learning things in the past. Back in 2019, I did a little bit of machine learning related programming trying to detect genres in music. Um, I am, I don't usually call myself a musician, but I am an experienced music producer. Look me up on Spotify if you want to check out my music, but I've DJed for many years. That's my DJ equipment over there and drum set. And I got a studio with synths in the other room as well. In 2019, I did a little startup that didn't go anywhere trying to identify genres and quality of music. It's a very, very, very difficult problem that's only now, I think, starting to get cracked. But a year ago, I started working on with my girlfriend this startup called Olympia. And I've been doing that since February of last year. Actually, last RailsConf, not this RailsConf, but last RailsConf, I released something called Magma Chat, which was my version of ChatGPT. And some of you I know, Landon, probably checked that out. So let me share my screen. Okay, so what I want to talk about is essentially where we're at as a community of Rubyists when it comes to AI. Because if you've tried to do stuff in AI, you realize very, very quickly, especially with the more modern kind of LLM stuff, that it's very, very Python and JavaScript centric. You know, almost any service that you try to use that's either AI or AI adjacent. The latest one, just to give you an example, is yesterday I was playing with the service called BrowserBase, which is kind of gives you a fleet of Playwright or Puppeteer, you know, headless browsers for use by AI. They only give you TypeScript and Python SDKs. You know, pretty much anything that you go try to use is very, very rare to see any connection to Ruby. You basically have to roll your own SDK. Hopefully they give you a well-documented REST API and you're good. But it does get a little bit depressing. And then some weeks ago, I can't remember how many weeks ago, I got a little kind of like worked up about this situation, the status quo, and I was talking to, amongst other people, Andre, and I wrote this blog post on my Medium blog that went pretty viral and got tens of thousands of views, just kind of advocating and evangelizing. Kind of got my 20-year-old Ruby on Rails evangelizer hat out and just started talking big about why Rubyists are poised to really kick ass in this new field. This is let's call it I'm not going to say not true, but it's aspirational. It's like it's basically painting a vision, creating a roadmap to say, look, we are well poised if we choose to do it. We could throw our hands up and go, oh, fuck it, we'll just learn Python or JavaScript, or we could look at what we're capable of as a community, what we've done in the past. And today, specifically, I want to talk about two different topics. One is prompt-driven development, which is this idea of that I'll get into where basically your entire app from top to bottom is defined by prompts. And because that is like super theoretical and speculative and doesn't exist yet, we can like maybe discuss that in a Q&A and argue about it and have fun with it as a topic, but it's more futuristic. And I also want to show you, like, kind of give you a preview of what I think is possible to do in a prompt-driven way now, which is what I actually document in my book, amongst other things, the book that I'm writing based on my experiences at Olympia. So my thesis is essentially that as Ruby and Rails community members, we're well positioned to lead in a lot of this cool, innovative stuff that can be done. So essentially, what it comes down to is a concept that is not actually new at all, which is how much of our code can be written in English, or you can substitute any other language, Spanish, whatever, essentially natural language. And some people say, hey, natural language sucks for defining software. Yes, I agree. Historically, natural language sucks for defining software. There's a lot of truth to that. And there's a lot of historical context to draw from when it comes to this idea of using natural language to define software. The granddaddy of it is, of course, COBOL, which dates back to the late 50s. And in the 60s, it's actually my uncle's COBOL textbook from university is probably the first programming book I ever saw in my entire life. Probably kind of lucky that I did, because like it just seemed natural to me. Like, as a kid, I said, hey, this seems to make sense. The reason is that the syntax was intended to be understandable by normal business people. SQL, same thing. The idea was that regular business people could use SQL. Then in the 80s, you see that like kind of this has been a concurrent theme or a consecutive theme throughout the decades. HyperTalk, and then AppleScript, Inform, and there's other things. They're all kind of centered on the idea that like if we could write software in plain language, it would be easier to maintain, easier to develop features, etc. What's happening today, thanks to large language models, I think kind of takes that historical context and like shoots us into the future if we choose to take advantage of it. And the way that I'm defining prompt-driven development, I don't really see too many other people talking about it. Not that I've necessarily looked, but I'm not claiming that I invented any of this. This is, to me, is just kind of like the logical conclusion of where you take the fact that computers can now understand, in quotes, natural language, is that your application behavior could be defined by declarative prompts. So your prompts would be your living, breathing code base. If you wanted to do some, add some new features to your software or some workflows, maybe some event handling, whatever you need to do, you describe them in conversational language. Now, this could take the form of prompts that you kind of like type into an editor and submit, or put into source control and it gets built. Or even more so, it could take the form of a conversation with an AI where the AI interviews you about what it is that you want it to do. So if I said, I need a new screen, it would say, what do you need the new screen to do? And if I said, hey, I needed to keep track of this new data that we have to collect because of regulatory concerns. Okay, well, what regulatory concerns are you addressing? And you go, well, it's these regulatory concerns, and it looks them up and it goes, hey, is it this new law that was passed? You go, yes. He goes, great. You want me to load what I can find out about that new regulation? You go, yes. And he goes, okay, based on this regulation, it seems like, you would need to keep an audit log of these things in your business. And you go, cool, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So, so on and so forth. You get the picture. The idea is that it's a conversation. So when I say prompts, it's important that you don't just limit yourself to thinking, I'm writing a prompt in a prompt engineering kind of way. When I say prompts, it's actually like potentially a conversation that you're having with the system that's going to deliver your software. As a result, the behavior application is entirely dynamic and it's implemented completely at runtime. I don't contemplate a compiler or an interpretation stage where it like kind of outputs a an artifact that reflects that conversation, which you then check into GitHub. So this is why I say this is speculative and pretty futuristic, because obviously there's a lot of things that we would have to get through to get there. But the output of the system is working software. When I gave a talk in Vegas, some of you were there, talking about kind of a vision for this sort of future. I said, one of the things that is holding back a lot of people I talk to is that they imagine that the state of the art is going to stay the state of the art. So you look at the performance profile of an LLM right now, and you go, yeah, that'll never happen. But you have to fill in the blank, which is with the current performance profile of current LLMs. They're not fast enough, they're not smart enough, can't reason enough. However, I think the direction that we're headed, and the amount of performance that we'll get out of these technologies when all is said and done, you could literally describe. So let's pick up that conversation I was having with the system about this new regulatory concern that I have for my software. And once I get to the point of describing user experience artifacts that I want my software to have, it could go boom, boom, boom. Give me like one or two options. Like, here, do you mean like this, A, or like this, B? And maybe it gives me like a tabular format, and another, gives me a little more free-form format. And I go, oh, yeah, I want a tabular format. And he goes, great. Do you want to be able to drill down? And I go, yeah. And I click on a row in that tabular format. And it goes, uses this huge brain, and it generates a drill down. And then it goes, do you like drill down A, B, or C? And you go, C looks like exactly what I wanted. And then, it's like basically, it's like if you had a magic wand, as a programmer, you had a magic wand, you could create an implementation. And I literally think it wouldn't be screenshots. It's not like it's generating some sort of mock-up. It can jump straight to the actual software, create sample data, populate it all in one step. So this is what I mean by prompt-driven development. Someone tell me real quick, because I haven't been to an NYC Ruby event in years, especially not lately. Do you guys normally interrupt for questions, or you leave questions for later? Like, how do you want me to handle that?
It's up to you. Typically we often do it at the end, or when
Okay.
you're done with your presentation, whatever works best for you.
Okay, I'll get through it and then we can discuss. So the next thing I want to get into is essentially, okay, like this is all well and good and sounds super futuristic and cool, potentially cool. I don't know. What does this have to do with Ruby? And my thesis there is that as a community, we're already kind of primed to think about writing software this way in a number of different ways. The primary one is that we think about software in a domain specific language. And actually, sorry, this is the first time I'm giving this talk. I'm going to get into that in a second. Before I move on from PDD, I want to talk about how this is different from some of the other AI-related programming things that some of you are working on right now or may have heard about. So how is this different from AI-assisted software development? And the thing is that AI tools like Copilot and Blueprint, Scott Werner, I think may even be in the meeting, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure he's part of your group. He's writing something called Blueprints. It uses language models to generate code. Copilot, obviously completion, I don't need to tell you what that is, but a lot of the state-of-the-art current AI-assisted software tools that many of us are taking advantage of accelerate current paradigms of how we program. And I'm not going to say much more about that because I think it's pretty obvious. Now, some of the more leading edge stuff, more exotic stuff, some of the stuff that's actually worrying people about like, hey, well, we have jobs as programmers in the next few years, are things like Devin and similar agent-based systems that replicate human programming activities or programming teams entirely. And the idea there is to replicate current paradigms. So like if you work with one of these tools, you're giving them requirements, they're working on it in the way that a human programmer would work on it, and then they're creating code which presumably gets checked into Git and gets deployed through a pipeline, etc. So these are two different things from what I was discussing. In prompt-driven development, I think that all of that goes away. It's like an entirely, completely different paradigm from anything that we're doing right now. It's no code on steroids. It's Star Trek shit. It's like essentially the only thing that's stored in source control, if we even still use source control, is prompts describing functional requirements and prompts describing non-functional requirements. And again, those prompts could be prompt engineered probably at first, or they could be result of conversations. They could be in some intermediate language, which is produced as a result of those conversations. Who knows? But I think the idea is that we don't even necessarily work with that code at all. So like we don't, eventually we get to a point where we're not diving in to that code to try to debug what's going wrong. It's more of just a real-time system. Small talkers can think about it kind of, I think there's parallels there where you poke around with the running software. It's all in production at that point. Where does the actual running code, the stuff that's on the metal, actually exist? Well, it's in the frameworks that we write to actually facilitate this, or it's generated in cache at runtime, or it's the AI. It's a black box. It's the reasoning ability of the language model or whatever. Okay, so now I want to get to why Rubyists are primed to be, to pioneer these kinds of approaches. Why would I even be thinking about this in the first place? I don't think it's just my particular interest. I think it's because for the last 20 years, been doing Ruby since 2004, I've had it baked into my brain that that my programming language should be expressive, that my code should be readable, that my code should read like natural language. From very early on in my Ruby journey, I embraced DSLs. I thought that was one of the coolest things about Ruby on Rails. I worked with Jay Fields on pushing the state of the art on internal DSLs defined in Ruby, and so on and so forth. And we see that over and over again over the years, you can almost say over the decades, of what the state of the art in Ruby is. A lot of it involves this code that reads like natural language. Because of Rails, those of us that do Rails, we are just we are naturally pushed towards embracing writing our code in a declarative way, accepting convention over configuration. Convention over configuration is another way of saying that you're putting trust in your framework to know what it's supposed to do. When I'm envisioning the way that you work with an AI, it's like convention over configuration taken to its logical conclusion. I'm relying on convention, aka the knowledge of my framework, to take care of the details so that I don't have to worry about them. I don't have to configure every little thing. What else? This is a little bit more opinionated, but I think we like our software to be humanized. It's part of the culture. It's part of our friendly nature. We, in the way that we name things, that we name our projects, kind of sense of humor that we bring, to our projects, going back to Sandro's HTT party and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's hard to put my finger on it and describe it in so many words, but I think that you can attach humanized to what we do as Rubyists. I think we have a knack for, thinking about our code structures in kind of microservice and object-oriented ways, obviously. But because we put an emphasis on naming and our code reading like natural language, I think we end up going towards kind of message-based systems that, if not directly related to what I'm talking about with prompt driven development, kind of like point there. It's like kind of the logical conclusion where they go to. And in fact, when I show you some examples of what I'm doing today in Olympia, it's essentially discrete AI components inside of my app that are talking to each other in plain language. So instead of using something that's closer to structured data or binary to talk to each other, they're talking to each other in English internally. I'm not talking about passing English from the user to these components. I'm talking about my app communicating with discrete AI components in English. And finally, hopefully this is not a controversial statement, we don't get hung up on raw performance concerns. I mean, this has been proven for the last 20 years. Rails still doesn't scale. There are still people out there saying Rails doesn't scale. There are arguments that you could make for saying, I think accurately, that Rails doesn't scale. From a just raw horsepower performance kind of way, yeah, you can squeeze more performance out of the metal with other technologies. Who fucking cares? We're okay with trading faster development and have more expensive hosting bills, if that's the case. And the kind of approaches that I'm talking about, that's exactly what they do. I'm finding that if I have the right mindset, I can identify parts of my system that traditionally would require dozens or even hundreds of lines of code to implement. And if I replace those dozens or hundreds of lines of code with an AI black box, and I just tell the AI, this is what I want you to do in a prompt way, I get done orders of magnitude faster than I would if I had to write that code out. It's also orders of magnitude more expensive, especially now, and especially because it requires frontier models like GPT-4, which are very expensive, but those are the only ones that reliably call functions. So some people would go, you're crazy. Why would you do that? Why would you introduce something in your code which literally costs you a fraction of a cent every time you call it? Why would you introduce something that on top of your server bills, it means that you're going to have hundreds of dollars invoice every month to OpenAI? And I go, because the trade-off is worth it. The trade-off in cost and the trade-off in potentially latency is worth it. It means I'm able to, by myself, write a system and maintain a system that would take, half a dozen people to write or maintain, or that would take longer to deliver because of the extra work that needs to be done. We are definitely okay with that because we've proven it for years with Rails. So that's kind of like the current conceptual theoretical, like, okay, this is why I think Rubyists are primed. We also have an actual concrete track record that we can point back to and go, hey, nearly 20 years ago now, so this is actually like what, the late 2000s or the mid to late 2000s, literally the people who invented behavior-driven development, and Julius was there with me at the time. Call me out if I'm bullshitting here, but I don't think I am. BDD, behavior-driven development, which is an approach where you collaborate between developers and non-technical stakeholders by writing the specifications of your system in structured English that is near natural language, was invented by Rubyists and people who were fan of Ruby at ThoughtWorks. Dan, Liz, Aslak, the inventor of Cucumber, Dave Estells, who I worked with at Chrysler, Aslak, who I worked with at Chrysler. There were kind of these famous projects at ThoughtWorks. I wouldn't say world famous, but like within ThoughtWorks, those of us that know know that a lot of these concepts were pushed forward during the era in which Ruby was in ascendancy at ThoughtWorks. Like basically, I was one of, if not the first person to do paid Ruby development at ThoughtWorks in 2005, in the spring and summer of 2005, at John Deere, with the first Rails app that ThoughtWorks ever did and got paid for. And from there, we went from a 50-50 split of Java and .NET to 40% of our billings in 2007 being in Ruby. And a lot of the action, a lot of the really, really hot technologies and leading edge innovative stuff that was going on, the development of RSpec, development of BDD was going on by Rubyists. So if you're not familiar with BDD, I'm sure many of you are, but the given, when, then syntax, you wrote it in English. I mean, at HashRocket, we literally had our business analysts writing Cucumber, or I guess Gherkin would be the more correct term. But they would sit down with the clients, they would gather requirements, and they would write Gherkin from scratch in Vim and produce it, and then we would go in and implement it. We're already kind of primed. Because the only difference between BDD, classic BDD, and what I'm advocating for with PDD is that instead of writing the specification for your tests that verify the system, you're actually writing the specification for the system that generates your system. There's no longer any. I don't know how you would do testing. I don't know if you would need some sort of BDD, or you tell the system how to test it, or it just figures it out. I don't know. That's something else we can discuss. But. Okay, so I've been kind of hand wavy and futuristic and crazy. So is anything of this applicable today? And here's where we're going to plug my book. I know some of you already have it. A few days ago, I kind of finished up the final words of the final chapter. It's in first draft form. I need to go through, make the whole thing more cohesive. Some of you are going to help me out with technical review. And then I'm going to publish it in print form as well. But is it already complete? And I'm already getting mail from people who are applying this stuff and having conversations with people who are finding use in it. So yes, it is useful already today. This is stuff that I'm doing in my startup, Olympia. I'd run out of time if I started telling you about like all the different patterns and approaches that are in the book. I just want to give you a taste. One of the sets of patterns that I talk about is the use of what I call discrete AI components. The idea is that you can take, as I said before, parts of your system, maybe it's features, maybe it's a job, that if you implement it in the typical way, it might be dozens or hundreds of lines of code, and you can replace it with a discrete AI component, in other words, a black box that has inputs and outputs. You don't worry too much about the implementation of how it figures it out. You just tell it what you want it to do. And to me, this is a stepping stone, right? Like if this became a widespread practice, I think this is what would point the direction to what I was talking about in the first half of the talk. So I want to give you an actual example of what I mean by that. And this is something that's in use. Pardon the long text, but this is actually the prompt of this component. I'll just read it in case it's too small on your screen. So there's an account manager component. It's one of these discrete AI components. It says, you are an intelligent account manager for Olympia. The user will request changes to their account, and you will process those changes by invoking one or more of the functions provided. Escalate to human support rep if you encounter any problems. Do not allow the user to change their account or add a new AI assistant unless their account subscription status is active. Remember that particular requirement because I'm going to come back to it in a second, okay? And then the final two, make sure to notify the account owner of the result of the change request, whether or not it is successful. Always end by calling the finish function so that we can save the state of the change request as completed. This reads almost like a story, like a requirement. In fact, the first version of this component did not have that second sentence or that second statement there. Do not allow the user to change their account or add a new assistant. I rolled out the first version of this. It was used a bit, and my support guy says, hey, we have a situation with someone that added a bunch of bots to their account and they're using them, but their account is not active. Is that allowed? And I said, no, that's not allowed. He said, okay, well, then should I add a story to Notion? So we changed that. And I go, actually, I think I got it. And I went in and I added this statement to the prompt. Problem solved. That was the requirement added, in just a matter of seconds. So that you see that I'm not bullshitting you, I'm actually reproducing part of the code here. And this is probably too small for some of you to see, but don't worry, this is literally in the book. I provide a lot of this stuff already. Give you some highlights here at the top of the screen there on lines 5 and 6. I'm including a couple of modules. One is called chat completion. This is what gives the ability to prompt an AI within a class. And I'm including function dispatch, which is what allows me to declare functions declaratively. These are modules that are part of my rakes library that's also linked to in the book, or you can find it on my GitHub. It's literally extracted from Olympia. And I'm not the world's #1 experienced open source maintainer. I actually would love some help from someone that has a little more experience. But I have been steadily extracting stuff and putting it there so that other people can do the kind of things that I'm doing here. So if you've done any amount of AI programming, you've maybe played around with prompt objects or storing prompts in your database or in YAML or any number of things. I don't like that level of indirection. I actually like having the prompts in your face wherever you're using them. If you've done any sort of function calling or tool calling, you have to write JSON. You have to write JSON schema kind of function declarations. I don't like that either. So I've kind of come up with the ability to declare your functions in line there. So the one function that I chose to include here, add bot config to account. This is shitty code. I'm not saying it's great code or anything like that. It was written quickly, but this is defining a tool that can be used by the AI in executing this prompt. It has other tools. It has a notify customer service. It has a finished function, et cetera, et cetera. If in the discussion, if you're interested in seeing it, I'll actually pull up this source file and show you some of the code. But you see that within the implementation of the function, I'm not using AI. It's actually like just normal code that does the thing that it's supposed to do. But the choice to call it is up to the AI. And actually, the way that I test this is just I don't actually have a good testing approach yet. I just kind of manually test it and make sure it works. And some people might say, hey, how do you know it's always going to work? And I go, hey, I don't know that it's always going to work, and I honestly don't care. Like in my particular domain, being Olympia, it's a productivity app that uses AI. It's kind of like a super fancy ChatGPT. If it was to have a failure mode or didn't work in some case, like we would deal with it. So if this results in people getting killed, probably not for you. If not, just a little disclaimer, your mileage may vary. But yeah, I mean, there on line 18 is what I was telling you about. Do not allow the user to add a new bot config unless their account is active. So yes, you can do stuff like this today. I started getting into this a little bit, but there are challenges, especially long-term. How do we ensure execution is efficient and secure? How do you ensure deterministic results when those are called for? I think as with any new approach, it is scary, especially when you hear something like non-deterministic. I mean, one of my favorite, most fucked up stories of all time in my career, which I talked about in an infamous talk in RailsConf called $1 Million Mongo, was when my biggest historical client, who I'd built millions of dollars with in HashRocket, the CIO went to the Mongo website because he didn't know what Mongo was. And on the freaking homepage of the Mongo website, it says, or said at that time in 2009, Mongo is not a transactional database. And as a result, that CIO came back to us and said, hey, why are you using Mongo? It's not a transactional database. You should be using Oracle. Or MySQL Server, which is what we were using before. And I said, no, don't worry about that. We're using it in an appropriate way because we're building a document handling system for you. And he proceeded to go to another Rails firm who built it on Postgres for him and worked up a debt of $500,000 and then didn't pay me because Mongo was non-transactional, and obviously I didn't know what I was talking about. When we see things like AI is non-deterministic, that is super freaking scary, and it could scare your stakeholders, and possibly for good reasons, you know? What I can tell you in practice so far is that GPT-4 is pretty freaking good, and especially if you turn the temperature down to 0, you do get pretty deterministic results. It is pretty reliable. Does it take a lot of prompt engineering sometimes? Does it take a lot of testing and refining, kind of figuring things out? Yes. Does it occasionally take threats like, I will hurt you if you don't call this function every single time? Yes. Amazingly, that works sometimes. You know, I feel bad for myself, my future self, when the AI revolution happens and the bots come hunting for me for abusing AIs. But notwithstanding, you know, how do you debug an issue, right? Like if something doesn't work, how do you figure it out if it's in that black box? It's hard, potentially hard. There are downsides, you know, and your mileage may vary. But finally, and this is kind of where, you know, we'll transition over to questions and maybe make this a discussion. I have been on the leading edge of a number of disruptive technology revolutions that people called too magical, too slow, too inefficient, la-di-da. The first one was in 1995 when I started using Java, and everyone thought Java was a freaking joke. It was for applets, and we know how that went. And then with Rails, which everyone said was a joke and didn't scale, and it was too slow, too magical, too abstract. You can see where that went. And I think that potentially we're going to get the same kind of criticisms if we start doing some of this stuff. It's too slow, they'll never work, it's too expensive, you're crazy, it's a toy, it doesn't work for serious applications, etc. I can hear it now. All the exact same things. Yeah, it's anecdata, you know, like it's not necessarily going to pan out, but you know, to me, this provides sufficient fodder for excitement that I'm actually like writing a book and you know, kind of staking the rest of my career on it. I feel like this is probably the last big wave that I'm personally going to ride. But it seems bigger than all the waves before it, in terms of what it could potentially do. So that makes it very, very exciting and compelling. So yeah, that's my talk. And it looks like we have like, you know, maybe 20 minutes for question and discussion.
Thank you. That was awesome. Just feel free to shout out your questions, you know, or if you want to raise your hand, anyone.
I don't have a QR code or anything like that, but if you go to LeanPub, it's really easy to find, or just, you know, just search my Twitter.
I put the link in the group chat.
Cool. I'm just pulling up the chat, and someone raised their hand. Julius, my old friend. How are you, man?
Hey, Obie, good to see you again. It's been a long time, far too long. We should
Minute,
definitely
yeah.
catch up. But you mentioned BDD in your talk, and one of the things I've been playing with is using Gherkin as
Mhm.
my, how I tell various language models to build code. I'm curious if how much you've explored down that path, or if
I
it's
personally, I personally haven't. So maybe you can tell us, kind of what your results are.
it's been mixed, right? And I would say definitely, if you write your Gherkin in, say, maybe specification by example sort of style, it misses a lot of stuff, it seems, right? And if you sort of write what I would normally coach people not to write when communicating with humans and getting a little too overly specific, that seems to resolve a lot of that. And I'm kind of at war with myself on talking, Gherkin for humans versus Gherkin for AI models right now. But it's been promising. I think there's some legs there if somebody put real work into it.
You know what someone should do is create a LoRa for Gherkin with an
Yeah.
open source model like a like a Wizard 3 or Mistral. I'd be willing to bet money it would work really, really well, actually.
That's my instinct too. I would love for somebody else to do that because I'm a little busy.
Cool. Thanks for that. Carlos.
Yeah, Obie, thanks for the talk. What were the dead ends that you tried before you landed on this approach? I think sometimes you can learn just as much from failures as you can from success.
Um, there haven't been any like big, like major showstoppers where I kind of just like had to stop and scrap and start an entire approach over. But there is something I can share along those lines. So essentially, even the frontier models right now, I've tried. I've even started trying a little bit with Opus now that they have function calling. They're just not smart enough yet. You throw a big complex transcript and more than one or two functions at them, and they get confused pretty quick. I've tried mitigating that, and in fact burned 2 or 3 weeks. It's something that I ended up having to throw away, which is not documented in my book as a result, although I could have tried to, and I might in the future. So what it essentially is almost like a preprocessor that gets a transcript, gets a prompt, and then tries to classify like, hey, what kinds of functions might I need? Because if you take all of the tools that we have at Olympia, there's probably 50, 60, 70 functions. I don't know, I haven't counted. Because some of them are like not used, some of them are old, etc. You can't put that many functions in a single conversation loop. It's too much. It reduces the IQ of your main conversation loop. It's confusing and it's super expensive. It's chewing up a lot of tokens every single time you prompt the bot. So I went down the road of trying to discern with an open source model, as I tried like basically every Mixtral, every Llama 3 to like figure out what set of functions I might need and then add those dynamically to the prompt. And I see Andre kind of nodding his head there. Like everything is not quite there yet to do that sort of stuff. I mean, you plan it out, you start working on it, you go, this should work. And I just couldn't get it to work reliably. And a lot of the failure modes of the approach and of Olympia in general, just as far as our user experience, I think is just that it's like GPT-4 is not quite good enough. It sounded even like what Julia said, with Gherkin, it's not quite good, right? Like, once you get into stuff that's a little more difficult, a little more complex than what should be obvious, it starts falling down, which is disappointing. But and some people are like, oh, it'll never catch up because fundamentally they're just stochastic parrots. They don't reason. They're not smart. Blah blah blah. And I've seen some interesting defenses of that stance, and I'm choosing to think that no, they're wrong. Like GPT 4.5, GPT 5, and so on will be more better. So yeah. That work?
Yes.
Rod, hello.
Hi. First off, a great talk. One of the most thought-provoking that I've come across so far. I was reading in The Economist about how they were doing similar things for robotics, basically on the fly reprogramming of the robotics, of the control mechanisms, just through natural speech. And I was wondering, when are we going to get that with programming itself? And sure enough, you're already working on it. Could you give us a little context on Olympia? Like, did you conceive it as something to exploit this possibilities that you already saw? Just give us a background on that, because the specifics would help.
Sure. Can you see my browser still, or do I need to share again?
Yes.
You see the desktop. Yeah. Let me plug Olympia real quick and just tell you a little bit about. So Olympia is currently between 4 and 5 full-time people. It's mostly been just me and my girlfriend. About 3 months ago, I got a part-time developer, and we have a customer service person. So we're already running the business of Olympia operationally with a lot of help from our own assistants. We dog fooded the whole thing from the start. A lot of technical people, because we're technical people, end up not too interested in Olympia because they look at it and they go, "Oh, I don't get how this is different than GPT." The way it's different is that I've built this like basically for us as we've built it. So like one of the first things was like, hey, it's stupid to have to keep entering the same information. So I gave it memory right off the bat. Early on did RAG. I hated the disclaimers, so I made it never give you a disclaimer. It doesn't matter if you ask it for medical advice, doesn't matter if you ask it to do a legal contract, it won't be like, hey, you need lawyers. I hated that with ChatGPT, it was like impossible to talk in the same prompt with my teammates, so I made it multi-user. You can have more than one user in your account talking to the same prompt. I absolutely detest the fact that it just jumps right into giving you solutions. Like as soon as you start talking about anything, it just immediately gives you a big giant bulleted list of crap that you didn't ask for. So I gave it question mode, which just forces it to ask you questions. It's like, if anyone's done improv, it's the question game, with the AI. Like it will only ask you questions when it's in question mode, which is very good for brainstorming, very good for quickly entering information. So stuff like that. It has outbound email. It now has inbound email. It can manage your inbox. We're in the process of rolling out integration with Google. Some users have it. I can do things like, hey, generate an outline for a talk based on my blog post, which is literally what I did, and say, okay, now create a slide for each one of the slides that you defined in Google Slides, and it'll use the Google API to create slides. So we're getting to the point where it has nice integrations and stuff like that. Can do long form writing, can do thousands of words of output by recursively, kind of iterating on an outline, et cetera, et cetera. It aggregates a bunch of different AIs as well. The main conversation loop is GPT-4, but it uses Gemini Pro with its millions of tokens of context in order to do document search. It uses Perplexity to do real-time search of the internet, and it uses a dozen different open source AIs where I don't need to use GPT-4, and I want faster, cheaper results. And finally has a search engine, which ChatGPT still doesn't have inexplicably. So anyway, that's Olympia, and I think the question was how am I planning to exploit this? I mean, yeah, I'm whatever crazy shit I come up with, I try it in Olympia, right? And I'm planning to extract whatever I come up with in Olympia fairly liberally to open source projects. There's at least 3 or 4 of them that I can think of. I extract Anthropic Jam, Open Router, Gem. I love these guys, Open Router. I'm always evangelizing them, and I promise I have no deal with them or anything like that. But I don't know why anyone in their right mind wouldn't use Open Router. It's one one API key, one invoice for like all of the models, including commercial models like Perplexity and GPT and Cohere, etc. And they're constantly adding as things come out, they come out. Yeah. And they don't mark it up. It's like there's like a 1% markup or something like that. So anyway, yeah, that's my plug for OpenRouter. Yeah, I'll keep, extracting to open source and keep extracting to books. I mean, there's so much source code from Olympia in the book, just as like, here's how you do this thing. A lot of the patterns are literally directly lifted from Olympia.
Do you mind repeating the name of the repo under your GitHub? That
Yeah, it's I'll just type it out. So it's on Olympia AI
that's what I can find. Okay.
Rakes Rails. Ray Rails. And make that bigger so you can see it. It hasn't really caught on too much as far as I can tell. It's really raw, but there's good stuff in there as far as I'm concerned. Now I have to give a lot of respect to Andre for the work that he's done on LangChain. And disclaimer, the book does not cover LangChain at all, and that's not because I hate Andre or anything like that. It's just a very different approach. I tried LangChain early on and was like, it's a little too complicated. I want to try doing some different abstractions that are more Rails-like. So that's the approach I've taken. Like essentially, I want to be able to annotate my classes declaratively at the top, the way that you do with everything else in Rails, and that's the approach I took for this sort of thing. I can't tell if anyone else is raising their hand.
I'll raise mine
Okay.
real quickly, just while we're waiting for others. Love the talk. Thank you so much. It was awesome. You talked about the sort of, if I understood you correctly, the obsolescence of source code. And, given the fact that there's such a black box nature of AI today, that is, a little bit disturbing. I just want to make sure it sounded like you were saying you see a future where PDD is really, we only care about the prompts. Did I catch that correctly?
I mean, it's still very hand wavy and loose, but yeah, that's essentially where I'm thinking I'm going. There's like probably 20 steps between now and this crazy future. And I don't know if we're on that timeline. Like maybe LLMs really are hitting a wall and are not going to get there. And maybe we're going to go into some sort of AI winter again, but maybe not. And actually tomorrow I have a demo of someone, some top secret shit that someone's telling me is AGI. So I don't know, like it's still unknown. But if you don't have to manage source code, why would you? If all you need is the requirements. That said, and this is what gives me hope for my son, for instance, who is a software engineer from Georgia Tech and just starting in his career. He's only a couple of years in. I think the same pattern that we've seen throughout history with, Visual Basic and COBOL and SQL, where the promise is always like, hey, normies can now do this, right? You're seeing it now, even with AI stuff. It's like Midjourney. Oh, now everyone can make graphics. No, if you really want to get the most out of that, you have to become an expert in Midjourney, which is not that different from becoming an expert in anything else. Just like, I'm a music producer. I've been playing around with Suno and Udio especially. I can get vocals that 99% of you will not know are AI generated out of Udio, using my own instrumentals that I can now upload as of last week and generate vocals And it's like, fuck, I can actually don't need a vocalist anymore. I don't need, and I do plan on putting out more vocal music as a result, but I'm a producer. There are people, there are normies, like kind of, regular people playing around with Suno and Udio. But it's insignificant. Like, to me, it's utterly insignificant that normies are playing with these technologies, because they'll get tired of it after a while, because it's the novelty factor at play. And the people that end up really exploiting these tools are professionals that do the things that they do. So even if 10 years from now, we have some version of this PDD vision that I've described, it's still going to be us, that are having these conversations with the AI in order to deliver software, because we are interested in creating software. Your typical person is not interested in creating software. This has been the no code lesson, the COBOL lesson, the intentional software lesson, we learn it, every generation over and over again. So that's kind of what gives me hope for our industry, that now personally, as far as my evangelism for the Ruby community goes, and the reason that this is all couched in this way, is I do worry that we'll lose out, whatever that means, because we're not the lingua franca of AI, that a lot of people that, let's say the people who would be doing BDD now, just won't exist, because they'll switch to Python, which is a depressing thought. I mean, I've done Python, so I'm not just talking out my ass. I had a stint where I had to maintain some Django code and stuff. The culture is different, it's just not the same. So that's part of why I'm doing this evangelism and giving these talks, and I'm going to give this talk probably half dozen times all around the world at different Ruby conferences and stuff. And if you guys are passionate about this stuff, please, give your spin on it. Landon, please, take my talk and run with it. Like, give your own version of it. I think there's potential here. And I think some of the stuff that I'm talking about, like, no one's even really talking about yet. So there's still an opportunity to start out. I want to, I want to take dynamic. I don't want to go like typed from dynamic. I want to go more dynamic, like where it just, I kind of throw whatever shit I want to throw at a method and it figures it out, because there's a LLM layer inside. And people are like, hey, that's super crazy. Why would you do that? You're just going to make your software much slower. Burn tokens, kill all the tokens. I think that's the right approach to go now, because it's a race to the bottom on commodifying tokens. I think right now, anyone who's looking at the situation with LLMs and going, oh, that's too expensive, there's too many tokens, is like, it's like thinking in the 90s that, oh, that's never going to fit in my computer's memory. It's just that I don't think it's going to be a factor in the future.
Along the lines of costs and stuff like that, did you ever consider running your own private, like, AI cloud to mitigate costs? I was just looking at your cost structure on Olympia. I mean, it's very reasonable, right? I mean, I'm spending more than that now and the different stuff, that I'm using.
Yeah, I mean, this I'll show you the reason that I haven't. That takes a second to pop up. But the reason I haven't is because it's so ridiculously cheap to run open source models on OpenRouter, that the cost and annoyance of running these models myself are like, way multiples more expensive. Unfortunately, this graph is not going to come up, I think, or may not come up. But yeah, I'm spending. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, so it looks like my average is about, I don't know, $7. And I've moved some GPT-4 usage over to OpenRouter. I normally go directly, so that's why it's gone up. But GPT itself has gotten so much cheaper that even that is becoming less of a factor than it used to be. I mean, I used to be paying thousands of dollars to OpenAI months ago, and it's just come down significantly. Landon.
If I can unmute. So one question I have, so I've been working primarily with GPT-4 and 4.0, and I did do a little bit of 3.5 this week on like client work. But I've been curious, and I haven't done the personal exploration. I think you have, since you're using OpenRouter, of all the different models there are to use. I've used a little bit of Mistral, but are you finding like specific like what are your use cases for using like, you know, GPT-4 versus maybe you're using Mistral versus like an open model? Do you find the other models are doing certain tasks better?
There's things that because I advocate for this kind of like discrete component approach, you know, I'll kind of like default to trying an open source model first, especially if it's something that I want to be cheap, right? So it's like there's that trade-off. So like in this case, I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. I'll try to make this bigger just so it's understandable. This is a little component. There you see the array chat completion. So this is responsible for rewriting the body of an email in Olympia to be from your assistant or from yourself, because you can toggle from yourself or from your assistant. So the prompt is here. Let me wrap it so you can see what that looks like. All right. I'll make that somewhat readable. So this is the transcript. Is this the kind of thing you were asking me to like kind of have a use case or whatever? So this is using Mixtral
Yeah, that's right.
822 instruct. This is one of the great things about OpenRouter. If this model is misbehaving or not working for whatever reason, it'll fall back to the other model. And if Deep Infra, which is my preferred provider, is not working, it'll fall back to Together. It aggregates different providers. So for like GPT-4, you can fall back from OpenAI to Azure without needing an Azure account, which is like hallelujah, because if you tried to sign up for Azure, you know, like it's torture. So what this particular component does, the user will provide the body of an email for you to rewrite using Markdown. I'm using a pattern that I call ventriloquist, which is I'm talking for the assistant. So the first user message is the body of the email, and then I speak for the assistant. That's where the ventriloquist part comes in. How would you like me to rewrite this email body? And then if it's from the bot, then rewrite it as if it was written by my AI assistant, or else rewrite it as if I had written it myself. I tested it. This works. I tested with a number of different models. Worked great with Mixtral 822B. There you go. Problem solved. In cases, in general, I will default to using Mixtral 822B for almost everything because it's got a great performance cost profile. And it is much better than 3.5, like much, much better than 3.5. In my opinion, right now, there is literally no reason to use 3.5 for anything at all. There's absolutely no reason.
I have seen, I was looking at 3.5 and I haven't tested this, but I saw some literature where people were like, oh, you could like fine tune it to get it up to 4, but like I can't for the life of me figure out why you wouldn't fine tune 4 instead of fine tuning 3 to get to 4. I don't know, but I haven't seen any like actual use cases. Just
And
right.
I haven't run into any cases in Olympia, at least, where it made sense to fine tune anything. We tried. Lance Carlson, some of you know him, was working with me for a little while, and we did some experiments because we were trying to mitigate stalling. Okay, so stalling, I don't know if anyone else calls it that, but it's when you ask the AI to do something and it's like, oh, cool, I'll get to it. That's stalling. Like, it doesn't give you the output right away. So we were trying to reliably detect stalling, and 3, 5, or 4 were not up to the task of doing it reliably. So we were like, oh, okay, well, let's try fine tuning. And then GPT-4 got good enough that it didn't really stall anymore with just prompt engineering. So.
I'd like to just squeeze another question in if that's okay.
Mhm.
I picked up your book. I'm pushing through it. A little sidetracked with other things. I had a question for you. Like, how much of the underlying theory do you think you need to know to really be effective with the prompt engineering? And I think you made a reference to this in your talk about how you do testing. It sounded like maybe you could just recap like what your testing philosophy is on your prompts.
I often TDD this stuff, like the components I'm describing. I will TDD them because of normal reasons that one TDDs, because you're often not sure what you want, or how it's going to work. And while I'm TDDing, I can just pull up a spec and make this a little smaller so I can actually see. So obviously it's online. I'm not using a local model or anything. So what can I show you? Do a subscriber. So while I'm TDDing or testing actively, I have like a little macro in our spec that I changed to no VCR, just in my top level describe, and that disables VCR, so it's actually hitting the AI while I'm iterating and doing my TDD. And then eventually, when I'm done and it's working, I do one final time, and then I just get rid of the no VCR macro and let VCR take over. So this, I do leave them in my test suite so that they provide some amount of coverage. Well, some of them I copy out. I comment out just because not needed. They provide coverage for the stuff that uses the AI model. It doesn't provide coverage against the AI doing something different. So just like any other API, if the API does something different, you're screwed. But that seems to work pretty well for me so far.
Underlying theory question, like how to be effective at getting the best prompts. How much of the underlying theory do you think you should focus on just understanding, how these systems are built?
So what triggered me to actually, I was collecting notes for the book for a while, and what triggered me to actually like start working on the book was hearing someone go ask the question, how do I get started with this stuff? Because it's overwhelming. So the way that I structured the book and like kind of the level of detail I get into, I think is what you need to get into it, which is essentially, I mean, you obviously you need to know how an LLM more or less works. You need to understand context limitations. There's principles of In terms of prompt engineering, I think I was predisposed to prompt engineering just because I've always been a hacker. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I was a hacker. So I don't mind hacking on stuff, and the whole thing. I mean, if you think of it from a 50-foot, this whole fucking thing is a hack. Like, using AI in this way is a hack. Discrete AI components right now is a hack. So I love that. So if you come at it with a hacker mentality of like, hey, there's a lot of unknowns here, and like a lot of this shit's not going to work, and it's going to be weird. And if it does work, you might not know why it worked. I think that's probably more important. Like, it's almost like your attitude is more important than, what does a top P parameter do? Which I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I mean, I know more or less what it does, but you know, I think that stuff is not quite as important.
Thank you.
Anthony.
Oh, hey, Obie. Hello from New York. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Thank you so much for the talk. Do you think? I mean, do you know any good like open source like prompt um generators, or not generators, but like they just basically help the person create a more descriptive, specific prompt. So they do less of the follow up. They can, like, in other words, they can just sort of speed up, just internally in their mind what they're actually asking to say before just jumping in to asking the question from the AI.
I don't. Thanks for the question, Anthony. But I'm not sure that I do. And I think the reason that I don't is because I will use GPT itself to do what I think you just mentioned, if I understand you correctly. So if that's not entirely true. I think when I was starting out, I did that a lot. Nowadays, I'll just iterate. And I think it's more of a technique sort of thing. So maybe it's what Richard was alluding to, just in terms of how much prompt engineering knowledge you need to have. I think that one of the most common ways to get to a working is to over specify in your prompt. I don't know if anyone else has kind of had this experience, is like you basically go overkill on the description text, and you go overkill on the examples, and then you start pulling it back and start trimming it down and see what happens. Ignacio said Claude has a prompt generator. That's true. Yeah. If you're in the playground for Claude, or I haven't used the consumer Claude in a while. I don't know if that, but and then someone in the Ruby Discord, can't remember who, maybe Andre can help me here, but I think there's something called Prompt Garage. Is that right?
Yeah, or prompt craft.
Prompt Craft, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Which is specific. Discord's not gonna. Which is specifically for like iterating on prompts and trying different prompts at the same time. Now, this doesn't necessarily address Anthony's question, but if you're comparing different, if you want to compare very quickly different models and how they perform, the playground in Open Router is really, really good for that as well. So I got Mistral 7B in there, so like let me add DeepSeek Coder, and like GPT-4. Oops, Discord's opening up. And you can set a system prompt, you can set your parameters. Once you set your system prompt, I can apply them to all. And then I the chat and say, I don't know, what is the meaning of pizza rat? And just kind of see them compared at the same time. So I use this somewhat regular basis, like, I don't know, maybe once or twice a month. If I'm frustrated with something and I just want to check a bunch of models at the same time. DeepSeek didn't like the pizza egg question. That's funny. That's a really good model, by the way. DeepSeek in general are really cool models. Yeah, Andre.
So do you feel like the Ruby community is like what's been the reaction of the Ruby community to some of this? I know so I feel like if we go back to when like the whole blockchain kind of trend was unfolding, right? Like I recall that the either the RubyConf or the RailsConf was like against having the talks at the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like this time is different? Like,
yes,
how have you sensed the excitement or reception to AI broadly?
I got a perfect batting average so far with my talk submissions. So I mean that alone tells me that there's an appetite there. Also, crypto. A lot of crypto is a scam. I mean, I say that as someone who ran an NFT platform for a while. So, but this isn't, just plainly put. Now, I hesitate to say this, but it's me, so I'm gonna fucking say it anyway. Like, will there be some sort of woke-ish backlash to AI because of reasons? Who knows? I mean, will there be AI talks at Rails, at Rails World, but not RubyConf? I don't know. Like, maybe. Maybe when it starts putting people out of work in mass, but hopefully not, because I think there's a lot of good to come from it. Did you have a follow-up, Andre? Or otherwise, I'll let Ignacio go. Ignacio?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the talk. It was really interesting.
You're welcome.
My question it's more of maybe if you have any tips. How do you approach building something from the ground up when there's nothing documented in the Ruby side? For example, when working with RAG, and you want to do vector search. Right now, there's probably like maybe 2 gems that do that, but how do you research about how to implement the core logic for those things?
I mean, I know you can use LangChain for RAG, but I mean, I'll get to the core of your question in a second, but it's specifically for RAG. I use this platform called Graphlet. I may switch off of it at some point, but they are doing really cool shit. And I open source a library, a Ruby SDK for Graphlet. But this is basically a RAG as a service. And now they do Graph RAG as a service, and they're integrated with a bunch of other cool services like Azure Document Intelligence to be able to extract text from PDFs and a whole bunch of other stuff that I won't get into now because it's kind of, but you don't need to roll your own RAG, and you probably shouldn't. Like there are providers that are great. Andre.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like maybe this is not AI specific, but so DHH has been like evangelizing Linux, right? Rolled out this Omakub or however you pronounce it tool set, and then they released Campfire, right? Kind of host your own. And just general, like I was I was excited to see all of that because it felt like we're coming back to this like just hacker culture, right? It's you're not just like stringing a bunch of overpriced services together, like AWS services. Like you're actually doing stuff on your computer, right? Back to Linux and all of the back to like the Linux religion. So do you see kind of AI having a role here?
I mean, sample size of one. I mean, I've never worked on this much open source all at once ever. I mean, I have like at least 3 or 4 or 5 different active things that I've rolled out in the last 6 months. So,
Yeah,
there's like something almost every day. Like, like today I posted on the Ruby Discord about, I forget what it was. You remember what it was? Yeah, this thing. Like, so like essentially as you're going through and like finding cool shit to work on, like to use, it quite often doesn't have a Ruby SDK, but they almost always have REST or GraphQL interfaces. So rolling a Ruby client or SDK for it is just really low-hanging fruit to hack on. So I'm finding that really fun. I don't know about anybody else.
So,
Well,
sorry,
well,
just to extend on that, if I may,
Mhm.
sorry. So you're saying that it would be better just to research some APIs or services instead of trying to build them on like, from the ground up. Yeah.
I mean, if you're the kind of person that, would do something like that for fun, I guess that would work for you. But I mean, I'm actually doing a lot of this stuff in anger. Like, it's like I need it and I got no Ruby client for it. So fuck it, I'm gonna write it myself. Um once you get into it, you find a lot of stuff that doesn't have like, kind of first class Ruby support. And instead of going, oh, Ruby sucks, I'm gonna have to switch to Python or JavaScript. I'm a hardcore Rubyist, so I go, no, I'll write it in Ruby and open source it. So please do the same.
Given your background and contributions to the community, do you have any suggestions about how people might coalesce around that idea, and maybe be more productive as a community?
I I I don't, other than like, yeah, we got a great community in the Ruby Discord. So if you're not there already, like I think that's where a lot of these projects are and will coalesce in the future. Um, I think that's I think part of what we need right now is just to encourage each other. So having a community is important. So that you go and you don't feel like an idiot or crazy for wanting to do this stuff in Ruby. So that's probably my number one thing. If you don't do Discord, I'm sorry. Maybe there's some other. If anyone in the audience that has other ideas on that, please please pipe up. But yeah, no, that's right now. That's my number one. That's my number one advice.
Thanks.
There's I'll leave you with final thought, I guess, and then maybe we can wrap it up. There's I have a palpable sense. I've had it since earlier this year, I would say, that there's like a rails of AI, using AI in software development in some way. And that motivates me a lot. Like Like who's the DHH? What's the base camp? Who's the DHH? What's the rails of these new paradigms that are emerging? I find that incredibly motivating. I don't think there's any guarantee it'll be in Ruby, for sure. But I think I find it very motivating that since we were the ones that created Rails, I think we would recognize it and we would work on it if it became apparent what that was. You know, I think that the ground is fertile in our community to do something like that. And I find that incredibly motivating. And that is definitely what's been behind my surge. And I mean, to a certain degree, it's been behind me even working on Olympia at all. I mean, before I was working on this, I was pretty much semi-retired and just working on music. But when I started doing Magma Chat, it was like the very first seeds of that thought that like, hey, maybe there's something here that's like super big and it could be like the next Rails. And that got me working on it. And then the realization that, you know, if this stuff could be extracted has definitely motivated me a lot working on Olympia. Which hopefully could be the base camp of this, you know, new world. So that's where I come at it from, you know, and I find it incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really nice note to end on.
Cool. Thanks for the
Really,
invite.
really thank you for your time and answering all these questions. It's just really awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is great.
Cool.
Thanks, man. That was
Thank you. Good
Thank
seeing you
you.
guys.